I was driving home after my shift. It was already past midnight, and the road was a familiar two-lane highway with no streetlights. At that hour, there were almost no cars, which usually means one thing: if something goes wrong, you're on your own. I left at 12:41 a.m. My phone was nearly dead, so I drove without music and tried to stay focused. At 12:53 a.m., I saw hazard lights flashing up ahead. A dark hatchback was parked on the shoulder. It wasn't in a ditch. There were no skid marks. It looked placed. In front of it were two reflective warning triangles, set up neatly, like someone followed the manual. A man in a reflective safety vest stood beside the car. He waved for me to stop. I slowed down, but I didn't fully stop. Stopping in the dark on an empty highway is a bad idea, so I rolled forward at a crawl and lowered my window just a couple inches. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Battery's dead," he said. "Can you jump me?" "Pull in closer." I looked at him more carefully. Gloves. Hood up. He stood confidently. But what bothered me was this: he didn't sound stressed. He didn't sound stranded. He spoke calmly and quickly, like he was reading a line he practiced. "Did you call a tow truck?" I asked. "Or anyone?" He answered immediately, like he already knew what I'd ask. "No signal out here. Just pull closer. It'll take 1 minute." I glanced at the hatchback again and noticed something small but important. I could barely make out the rear license plate, like it had been smeared with mud or covered with dark tape. That could have been accidental, but on an empty highway at night, little details matter. I didn't argue. I nodded like I agreed, just to avoid escalating anything. "Okay, 1 second," I said. And then I kept driving. I didn't slam the gas. I didn't want it to look like panic. I just decided I'd get to a brighter area with signal and call for help from there. A minute later, I saw a small pull-off area on the shoulder, one of those emergency pockets. A sign beside it read, "Mile 12. I pulled in, stayed inside the car, and tried to call a friend. No signal. I tried 112. It didn't connect either. Just call attempt. I was about to pull back onto the highway when I saw headlights in my mirror. A car appeared suddenly and was approaching fast. At first, I thought it was just a random driver. Then I watched it do something that erased that idea completely. It didn't stop near me. It stopped at the hatchback, right where the man in the vest was waiting. And it stopped confidently, like the driver already knew exactly where to go. 2 people got out. One stayed by the hatchback. The other started walking down the road, toward me. There were about 200 meters between us. In a normal situation, nobody walks down a dark highway toward a stranger's car in the middle of the night. That was the moment I stopped doubting myself. I started my engine and pulled out. I didn't need to know their plan. It was enough to recognize the pattern. A broken car. A reflective vest. Then a second vehicle arrives and joins in. A few seconds later, that second vehicle got back on the road behind me. It closed the distance quickly. Then it flashed its high beams. Then it honked. I didn't stop. I remembered there was a bright toll checkpoint about 7 to 8 kilometers ahead, always lit, cameras everywhere. I drove straight for it. As I got closer, the car behind me came right up on my bumper. It didn't try to pass. It just stayed tight behind me and flooded my mirrors with light. Then it made the scariest move of the entire night. It drifted left like it was going to pass, but instead of passing, it matched my speed. It lined up so its front bumper was near my rear quarter panel, almost beside me, not behind me. It wasn't trying to overtake. It was positioning itself to hit me if I braked or swerved. I kept the wheel steady. No sudden moves. At 1:08 a.m., I reached the brightly lit checkpoint and turned in, deliberately driving into the strongest light, directly toward the cameras. The car followed me in, but it didn't go toward the barrier. It stopped parallel to me on a side lane for a second. The driver rolled down his window and said calmly, almost annoyed, "You're going the wrong way." It didn't sound like a comment. It sounded like irritation that I'd chosen a place with people and cameras. I didn't answer. I pulled closer to the barrier where the worker sat in a booth, and where my license plate was clearly visible. The car abruptly turned around and disappeared back into the dark. I stayed under the lights for about 20 minutes. When signal returned, at 1:14 a.m., I called 112 and reported what happened: the hatchback on the shoulder, the man in the vest asking for a jump, and the second vehicle arriving and chasing me. Then I drove home using a different route. At home, I immediately checked my dashcam footage. On the recording, you could clearly see the hazard lights, the warning triangles, the man in the reflective vest, the second vehicle arriving. And the moment one of them started walking toward my car while I was parked at mile 12. I saved the file. The next day at 11:26 a.m., an unknown number called me. I didn't answer. A minute later, I got a text. "Mile 12. You were close." When I tried to call back, the number was already disconnected. Then I walked outside and found a thin strip of paper tucked under my windshield wiper. It had one line written on it. "Now you know where you stop." I still don't know how they learned where I live. But after that, I understood one thing clearly. That night wasn't random. They remembered me. And they wanted me to know it. I left a small town at 1:10 a.m. I needed to reach friends on the other side of the region. The drive was simple: one highway, a single exit, then about 40 minutes of back roads. At 1:32 a.m., my GPS suddenly announced, "Road closure ahead. Rerouting." That surprised me. It was a normal highway, and I hadn't heard anything about construction. But at night things happen. So I stayed alert. A minute later, I saw yellow flashing lights ahead. A road closed sign stood in the lane, with cones blocking part of the road. From a distance, it looked believable. A man in dark clothes stood beside the sign holding a flashlight. No uniform. No reflective vest. But he waved the flashlight confidently like a traffic controller. I slowed down and lowered my window. "Detour this way," he said, pointing to a narrow side road on the right that disappeared into trees. "Where does it come out?" I asked. He didn't hesitate. "Back to the main road." 10 minutes. He said it too fast, like a scripted answer. I looked closer at the sign and noticed a detail that killed my trust. It wasn't mounted on a standard metal stand. It was zip-tied to a wooden post. The cones also looked wrong, old, scratched, and missing reflective bands. I nodded like I understood. I even turned on my blinker. And then I drove straight. There was a small gap between the cones. I carefully slipped through without touching anything. The man with the flashlight dropped his arm abruptly, like he hadn't expected that. And then I saw something else. Behind the "road closed" sign, a second vehicle was parked with its lights off, facing the road. The moment I passed the fake closure, that vehicle's parking lights turned on. At 1:36 a.m., I knew it wasn't construction. The car pulled out and started chasing me. I didn't stomp the gas right away. I didn't want to lose control. But I did accelerate. The headlights behind me grew larger. At 1:40 a.m., my GPS tried to reroute again and highlighted that same dark side road, insisting I turn. So I did the simplest thing possible. I turned the GPS off completely. No voice. No map. Nothing. I drove only by what I could see with my own eyes. A few minutes later, I saw a sign ahead. Truck inspection / way station. Those places are almost always brightly lit, with cameras mounted high on poles. I drove toward it like it was the only safe island in the dark. The car behind me stayed close but didn't pass. It felt like it was waiting for me to panic and turn into somewhere unlit. At 1:48 a.m., I pulled onto the way station property. It looked empty, no trucks, no workers, but the floodlights were on, and the cameras were visible. I stopped directly under a spotlight. The car behind me reached the entrance and stopped. Like the light itself was a barrier. It sat there for about 10 seconds. Then it turned around and disappeared. I stayed in my seat until my heartbeat slowed down. Then I checked my phone. The GPS, which I had shut off, was now showing a message. Trip finished. I hadn't finished anything. I had turned it off. And right then, I got a push notification from the Maps app. Thanks for visiting road closed. Like it was a real place I chose to go. After that night, I stopped trusting any midnight closure, unless it has real vehicles, real equipment, real signage, and at least one marked official car. I was driving home at 2:22 a.m. The road was almost empty. I was about to turn onto my street when I noticed something flickering in my rearview mirror. It wasn't proper police lights. Not red and blue. It was a single blue light sitting low in the windshield of the car behind me. The car moved closer and flashed that blue light briefly. Then it hit me with high beams. Then it honked. It looked like one message: pull over. I immediately remembered that real police vehicles don't look like that. But at night your brain tries to rationalize. Maybe an unmarked car. Maybe something official. Still, I wasn't pulling over on a dark stretch of road. I drove to the nearest place with light, a small 24-hour pharmacy near a crossroads. The car followed. At 2:26 a.m., I pulled into the pharmacy lot, right under a camera, and parked so my windows faced the entrance. The car with the blue light parked too, but not beside me. It stopped across the lot, in the shadow under trees. Nobody got out. I took out my phone and called 112. Calmly I said, "A car is following me with a blue light in the windshield, trying to force me to stop. I'm parked at a pharmacy under cameras. Can you confirm if there's an officer nearby?" The operator asked for my car make and plate, then said, "Stay in your vehicle. If it's police, they will approach and identify themselves. If not, remain in a well-lit area." So I sat and watched. About a minute later, the other car's door opened. A man in a dark jacket stepped out. He didn't walk to the pharmacy. He walked straight toward me. I lowered my window just a couple inches. He leaned down and spoke quietly. "Step out for a minute. We need to talk." "Who are you?" I asked. He didn't show ID. He didn't introduce himself. He just repeated, "Step out. It'll be quick." I looked at his hands. Nothing obvious. But there was nothing official in his voice. It wasn't, "Sir." It wasn't procedure. It was just, "Do what I say." I didn't argue. I said, "I already called the police. If you're police, identify yourself properly." He froze for a second. Then he took a step back and said something that made my stomach drop. "You shouldn't have called." He turned, got into his car, and drove off. No blue light now, like it had only been used for one purpose: to scare me into stopping somewhere dark. 7 minutes later, real police arrived. 2 patrol cars. Proper lights. Proper uniforms. They took my statement and told me people sometimes use fake dashboard lights to force drivers to pull over in isolated places. I thought that was the end of it. 2 days later, I found an envelope in my mailbox with no return address. Inside was a black and white printout of my car parked at that pharmacy. The photo was taken from the side, like it was shot from another vehicle. On the back, in pen, it read, "You're doing it right now. Keep doing it." I threw it away immediately. And since then, when I see strange lights or aggressive signals behind me at night, I don't check who it is. I drive only to places with cameras, people, and bright lighting. Because the scariest thing on the road isn't the darkness. It's someone in the darkness insisting you stop exactly where no one can help you.